he was talking to Quandre Diggs about how when you're playing with Jamal Adams, you better be ready because he's going to bring the energy every single day in camp. For Portland fans, they couldn't ask for a more humble, down-to-earth superstar. Damian Lillard is one of the best athletes I've ever covered, not just because he's so good at the game of basketball.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Locked In Podcast. My name is Ani.
My name is Shri.
We got a great episode for you guys here today. We have AJ Mccord, sports anchor for KOI and 6 up in Portland. She covers all things sports in the Pacific Northwest, and she's gratefully decided to join us for this episode.
We're going to get right into it. Enjoy.
Cool. So my name's AJ Mccord, and I am a sports reporter and anchor at KOI 6, which is the CBS station in Portland. I cover pretty much everything Pacific Northwest. I was at the Timbers game last night. I'll cover the Blazers game today, and then I head up to Seattle for the Seahawks training camp tomorrow. So this is a really good 3-day snapshot of kind of everything, all the sports and teams that we cover. I do a lot of features, a lot of in-depth stories, and a lot of social media. I also have an outdoor series in the summertime that is designed to help people understand how they can get outside and enjoy. I think Oregon's one of the prettiest places to live, and so to try and show them how they can get outside and enjoy that. So that's my AJ in Action series this summer. But it all comes back to just being a storyteller, telling other people's stories, sharing a little bit of the athletes that these fans adore in a way that maybe they don't normally get to. So there's my elevator pitch for you.
Sweet. Wait, quickly about Seahawks training camp. What's the buzz around Jamal Adams? Because I mean, watching him, he's just a transcendent player. But what are they saying about like his fit in the Seahawks defense?
Man, everyone lights up when they talk about Jamal Adams. Shaquille Griffin was telling me the other day that he just brings like a different energy to camp. Like he was talking to Quandre Diggs about how when you're playing with Jamal Adams, you better be ready because he's going to bring the energy every single day in camp, and you got to be ready to match it. So every single person that I talk to has just been stoked that he is on the Seahawks, and I'm really excited to see him in person.
Sweet. Yeah, I know a lot of people are excited about that team this coming year. But we wanted to start with kind of your early career. So we did some research, and we found out that like you worked for the San Diego Padres early in your career, and you got to work alongside Hall of Famer Trevor Hoffman, probably one of the Padres' most iconic players all time. One of the best relief pitchers ever. And, with him being your childhood role model, was there anything you took away from that experience, like both either personally, professionally? And at what point does the feeling of being starstruck kind of become a normal thing for you?
Well, it wasn't normal when I was like 19 years old and had that internship, that's for sure. The internship was with Dick Enberg, who is one of those guys that should always be mentioned when you talk about the greats of sports broadcasting, right alongside Vin Scully, Bob Costas. I mean, all those guys. And he really gave me my first shot. He gave me pretty free reign to learn from whomever I wanted to in the booth. So my job that season, I got to pretty much I think I might have missed 1 or 2 home games because I was still in college and had to go to school every once in a while. But I was supposed to get to every home game about 3 hours before the game, and Dick would always beat me there. And then we'd go over like storylines for the game. He'd send me down to the clubhouse to talk to players, find out what was going on. I was very fortunate that season. Jenny Kavnar was the Padres sideline reporter, and she's amazing. She taught me so much. She's with the Rockies now and doing play-by-play, just shattering ceilings everywhere. But Trevor Hoffman and also Tony Gwynn, I got to work alongside that season. And I was a football girl at heart. That was like my first passion as far as pro sports went. But going to Padre games in San Diego was just as much a part of my childhood. And I was there when, I think it was when Tony got his, or Trevor got his 500th save. I mean, like those milestones, you know, I was like 8 or 9 or whatever it was. And so I remember those milestones from a fan perspective. And then you get to meet these guys, and it's always kind of nerve-wracking to meet the players that you know, really, really like, because what if they're mean? What if they're different? And with Trevor and with Tony, they were both absolutely amazing, and they were exactly the same people in person to, you know, to who you were, or to you. And at that time I was a 19-year-old intern, as they were to, you know, another Hall of Famer. So it was really fun. I think now I'm maybe a little bit past the starstruck phase, I suppose. But like the first time I interviewed LeBron in person, there was a moment of like, oh, this is LeBron James. I need to be on my best game, you know? So it's a little bit less of like starstruck and a little bit more of like, you realize you need to meet the moment because the opportunity you've been given is pretty special.
Is Petco Park one of the best parks in the majors? Because I've heard it's really great. I haven't had the chance to go yet, but
yeah, I love Petco Park. Sounds like maybe the Padres are living up to how cool the park is this year for the first time in a long time. But yeah, Petco Park is unbelievable. It's beautiful. They've got that Western Metal building, but when I was going to games, I guess that internship was in Petco, but when I was going to games as a fan, it was Jack Murphy Stadium, and that was not that's not quite as good. So Petco is amazing though. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So you also grew up in San Diego, you went to college in San Diego, and you worked for the Chargers. So is it safe to assume that you're a Chargers fan?
I was a diehard bleed blue and gold Chargers fan until they decided to shatter my heart into a million pieces and move to Los Angeles. And now I can honestly tell you that if I did not work in the industry, I would not know what was going on with the team at all.
Sad.
I know, it's very sad. And LA doesn't want that. What, we don't have to get into that. We don't have, that's another podcast. But yes, I was a diehard Chargers fan. So after that internship with Dick, I got to meet some of the guys at NBC7, which is obviously the local NBC affiliate in San Diego. Derek Togerson and Jim Laszlovic, and Laz played for the Chargers and the Lions and Penn State. And so just wonderful, wonderful people. And that was where I really learned the ins and outs of kind of sports broadcasting from the local news perspective. Derek would take me everywhere with him. We covered so many things from Chargers girls swim calendar reveals to Chargers games to Padres. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the crazy things we went on. Some San Diego State stuff with Strasburg. I mean, we were everywhere. And so that was great. I really enjoyed learning from them. And that was really probably where I learned the most that helps me with what I do now, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. Yeah, I'm a huge Chargers fan, so I was just wondering, because you had the opportunity to cover Herbert when he was at Oregon, and now he got drafted in the first round by the Chargers. So I was wondering how you felt about that, about him going to the Chargers, being a former Chargers fan, I guess, now, as I can say. So do you feel like it was a good fit? You've covered Herbert a lot, and you obviously must know him and have watched him in person a lot better than, you know, me and Sri have. So
totally, yeah. Justin could be one of those really, really, really special NFL talents. He works incredibly hard. I think he worked really hard, not just on his field, like on the field skills between his junior and senior year, but also his leadership skills. I just feel like his growth personally was so evident between last year at Oregon and then his final, I guess, 2 years ago at Oregon, and then last year at Oregon when he led them to the Rose Bowl and was running all over the place like he's freaking Michael Vick. So that was really cool to see. And I think Justin has all the pieces necessary to become a franchise quarterback. And for the Chargers, that's what they need. I mean, With Phillip Rivers leaving and going to Indy, they are ready to welcome in their next franchise. And Justin Herbert is that solid, stable, steady dude, and he wants to be a Charger. He has that note that he wrote when he was, I think, 8 or 10, saying that he was going to play for the Chargers someday, and now he's there. So I don't think in fact, I know he's not the kind of person who's going to be chasing money or glory. He wants to be that steadfast person for a franchise. And the fact that he landed with the Chargers, I think, sets him up very, very well.
That's good news for the Chargers. And I'm glad you said the thing about him transitioning between his junior and senior year and really, blossoming into that star player senior year, because me and Shree went to the Redbox Bowl in 2018. End of 2018.
I'm sorry.
I saw him at his junior year. Yeah, it was the most boring game I've ever watched in real life.
It was so boring.
Yeah, so, after watching that game and then seeing the Chargers draft him, I didn't really keep up with him super closely in his senior season, so I was very skeptical. But watching him on Hard Knocks and hearing you and other, people that cover Justin Herbert talking and singing praises, including Tom Telesco, Chargers GM, I feel confident now. So thank you for giving me that confidence.
You should. Him in the Rose Bowl, him in the Pac-12 championship game, it's unbelievable. I think it's outside of ASU, right? That's the only game that Oregon really faltered last year, other than their first one, I guess. And that Auburn one was so close. So, yeah. Justin Herbert is ready to be the franchise guy, and watching him at Oregon last year was just so fun. Even you think about 2 years before that, right, was the year he hurt his collarbone.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's gonna be great. He's Chargers fans. You may be in someone else's city, but you have a great quarterback.
So you've also covered the SEC while in Arkansas, and now you're covering 2 Pac-12 teams, the Ducks and the Beavers. So the Pac-12 recently voted to postpone all sports to 2021 because of COVID-19 reasons. But the SEC said that they're going to power through, and they went ahead and created an in-conference schedule, and they said they're going to play football this fall. So having covered both those conferences, lived in both those areas, the South and the West Coast, do you feel like there's a really big culture difference between the two that may account for the fact that the Pac-12 was a bit more cautious in its approach to come back to sports and push it to the spring, whereas the SEC said, no, we're going full steam ahead. Football has to be played this fall?
Yeah, I think anybody who has spent time in the South versus the West Coast will be the first one to tell you it's very different culturally. That's not a knock on one place or the other. It's just different. And when you think about the states in the SEC, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, a few of those have pro teams, but living in Fayetteville, everyone lived, breathed, and died by the Razorbacks, and that was it. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why the SEC is playing college football, or is going to try and play college football this fall, and the Pac-12 is not trying to play college football this fall. But I do think that while Autzen and Reeser can be really, really, really special places, especially for big games, especially for rivalry games, there is something about the SEC and football that I remember going to my first Razorback game, and they called the Hogs. And I looked at my new boss. I was in the press box, and I was like, what is this? Like, what just happened? There is something that you cannot, it's just different. It's just special. It is a way of life. So like I said, I think there's a lot of reasons why one conference is choosing to try and push forward and another conference is taking a step back. But if you were to have asked me to guess between the SEC and the Pac-12 who would be playing and who would be not, this is exactly how I would have guessed it.
I'm glad you said that about the SEC because, for a lot of those markets, like the college football programs are their only sports teams in the area. So,
exactly.
Their fandom is like unlike anything I've ever seen. And
yep, and their economies. It's not just fans. It's those Saturdays, it's those businesses. It's no one would know where Tuscaloosa, Alabama was if it wasn't for Alabama, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I 100% agree with your culture thing. I mean, I grew up on the West Coast in the Bay Area, and I went to Texas for undergrad, and going to my first UT game was really like shocking. Like, is this how they treat football in Texas? Like, I mean, Texas is not in the SEC other than A&M, but in all other aspects, it is, the football state. And I think, yeah, I 100% agree with you that culture change is something that was, scary for me to witness in the sense like how much they treated. But yeah, I think I agree with you that if you were to predict, this is how it was. But I just was wondering based on your perspective. But yeah.
No, so that kind of ties into what I wanted to ask you, because recently, NBA Twitter legend Adrian Wojnarowski, he kind of tweeted that no superstar meant more to their market than Dame Lillard does in Portland. And like Ani said, like, we're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we're kind of spoiled with sports teams all around us. Baseball, we have the A's and the Giants, we have the Warriors, and you know how they've been for the past like 5-6 years. And obviously with football, like, the Raiders are out now, but we still have the Niners, we have the Earthquakes for MLS, and there's just no shortage of teams for us. But as someone who's based in the Pacific Northwest, mainly in the Portland area, what have you kind of noticed about the impact of some of these teams on fans, and how fans tend to embrace players like Dame Lillard, players like CJ McCollum? How are they different as players in small markets than maybe someone in a larger market like, say, the Bay Area?
That's a good question. So I mean, I think for for Portland, Woj is dead on. There's no player who is more important to their market than Damian Lillard, and that is not because he is just a franchise superstar who casually drops 61 because he's upset that he missed 2 free throws, but it's because of how much he invests in this city on a personal and professional level. You think about the guys that he has been trying to woo to come to the Portland Trail Blazers for the last 3 to 4 years, right? When Melo got here, we all heard how much Dame was like, I tried to get him here 3 years ago. Hassan Whiteside, same thing. Kent Bazemore, same thing. Pau Gasol. I mean, you go down the list of and not all of those guys worked out, obviously, but you go down the list, and Damian Lillard has been the best advocate for big name guys joining the Portland Trail Blazers that they could have asked for in the last 7 years. He's very happy here. I was talking to his brother a while ago, and you just don't even really realize the impact his family and his extended family are having on the city too. When he came here, he said he's only been, it was like his mom and his sister, I think, came with him, 2 family members. Well, now there's Lillards all over Portland. There's his brother,
Right.
there's his brother's family, there's his cousins, and they're all doing amazing things in the community. Houston Lillard is a first-year head coach at one of the high schools. His fiance owns a nail salon. His other cousin helps with an academy. I mean, it's just, or Houston helps with an academy, but you just think about how much this family has invested in the city of Portland, and like I said, personally and professionally. And for Portland fans, they couldn't ask for a more humble, down-to-earth superstar. Damian Lillard is one of the best athletes I've ever covered, not just because he's so good at the game of basketball, but because he is so kind. He answers every question. He's always thoughtful. He always has the time. He views even reporters as humans first, just the way that he wants to be viewed. And I think that's something that cannot be understated.
Well, yeah, you actually kind of answered my next question, because I was going to ask you, like, you've done so many interviews with Dame and CJ, and with right now, especially with their run in the bubble, and the playing game getting to the 8th spot, people have been talking about his leadership, how he's one of the best leaders in sports, and their perseverance. Like, Dame's right now playing with that dislocated finger, CJ playing with the fractured back. And I was going to ask you, like, do you get that feeling talking to them off the court that they're just these, like, special guys that, you can't really put words on what they mean off the court, but, you said so much on that already.
Oh, absolutely. And I think when Dame dislocated his finger, it was like, I have no doubt he's playing. Like, he dislocated it, and I was like, unless that thing is broken, in like 4 spots and he's incapable of forming that finger to manipulate the basketball, he will be playing in game 3 or whatever that was ahead of time. So yeah, they're incredible. And CJ is the same way. CJ is always really respectful, and both of them have been that kind of grit it out, tough it out. And what's really cool about their dynamic is they trust each other so much, and like not just on the court, but again off the court as men. They're great friends. Like when Damian Lillard's cousin passed away in quarantine, and CJ, he was Dame's personal chef, he was CJ's personal chef, he was Anthony Simons, and I believe Yusuf Nurkic's personal chef. And CJ came over and prayed with him, prayed with Dame, cried with Dame, and shared that grief. And so when you share that burden of grief, it's just like you or I sharing something traumatizing that you go through. Is you become closer to the people who helped you get through it, right? And so that's just one example, one recent example. But these guys are so connected and trust each other so much. There's like, they both, Damian Lillard in particular is a superstar. CJ McCollum is a star in his own right, but neither of them feel the need to one-up each other, to one-up their teammates, to prove that like when the game is on the line, I've got to be the one to take it. They're both looking around for who has the hot hand. I think about that third quarter in game 3. They fed Carmelo Anthony like he hadn't eaten in weeks, right? And that's because Melo had the hot hand. And so both of these guys are so unselfish and also have such great basketball IQ that they can recognize, hey, it's not actually my time, right? Like my shots aren't falling the way they want to. Melo's are. Let's get it to Melo. Let's get it to Gary Trent Jr. Let's set up plays for these guys. Let's get it to Nurk, you know? So I think that's something that also is just really, has been really cool to watch unfold in Dame and CJ's relationship.
No, I mean, I think this Blazers team really feels like a family in a sense, especially since Dame has come onto the scene, and I feel like Dame and CJ have a very good bond. And even bringing in Melo, a lot of people doubted he would fit in, but they kind of brought him into that fold. And you see now with Nurkic not playing until the bubble, but even now really folding in well to that team. So, I mean, being a small market team and kind of operating like a family, do you feel like that's what's making this Blazers team right now be more successful than pundits thought they'd be, even maybe than some of the Blazers players thought they'd be coming into the bubble, having sort of a very far shot of making the playoffs, but now giving the Lakers the number 1 seed in the Western Conference and having LeBron as their star player, you know, giving the Lakers a run for their money? Do you think that family aspect of the team and the overall organization, maybe even the whole city and the state of Oregon behind them, is kind of giving them that push that they need?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's always a time in sports when it comes down to who wants it more, right? Like in those hard fought games, that's what it feels like, is that there's always that moment where it's like, okay, they're either going to dig in or they're going to give up, or not even give up. That's the wrong word to use, but like they're going to dig in, or they're not going to have enough left in the tank to do that. And for the Blazers, that trust means that if one guy, like whether it's Lillard or Melo or CJ or Nurk, if it's one guy who makes the decision and can say on that next possession, I'm going hard, scores a tough layup, takes a charge, whatever it is, then all of a sudden the other 4 guys on the court are like, okay, I got to find it in me too, because my teammate's still laying it out on the line and I need to find that extra motivation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think one other thing that I always loved watching the Blazers in the playoffs was the fact that the Rose Garden used to come to life, especially in the playoffs. I think it's one of the best atmospheres in the NBA, kind of intimate, you know, really feels like you have the whole city of Portland kind of stuffed in there. But the one sad thing about the bubble, which you kind of talked about in your Instagram live with Chris Haynes, is the fact that there is no home court advantage. And, you know, the one thing I love about sports is the fact that fans can really sway aspects of the game. And I know that, you know, although the Blazers were the 8 seed coming in. They had one less home game than the Lakers would if it went to 7. I think the fact if the Blazers did play in the Rose Garden, I think that atmosphere would have been so electric, especially during playoff time, that the Blazers would have easily won every single game there. So I'm just wondering, there's no home court advantage, which kind of sucks for the city of Portland and just Blazers, the fans, and also the Blazers in general. I think they really feed off of that. So do you feel like if there were home games and we were able to play in the Rose Garden, that would have kind of been a turning point in the series? Or do you feel like, regardless of home court advantage or not, fans or not, Dame, CJ, this Blazers team is going to turn it up to the next level regardless?
Well, I think two parts there is, I've covered some amazing games in Moda, and also been, lucky enough to travel to Oracle, to the Thunder's home stadium or home court, to the Nuggets. And I agree, there is something very special about Moda, and maybe it's because it kind of had an OKC vibe in the sense that, again, the Thunder is the only pro team for OKC. So similar to Portland. But I think if you're talking about home courts, then you also have to talk about the fact that maybe the Blazers, Staples is no Staples is no slouch either. And so you have to talk about the fact that the Blazers got out of playing potentially 4 or 5 games there, right? Or yeah. So I think that home court plays both ways for this series in particular, which Chris and I talked about. It's just different playing with virtual fans than it is having to step over Beyonce courtside because the ball went out of bounds. That's just a little bit different. But that being said, I do think this Blazers team is pretty uniquely set up to not care about not having a home court or an away court for that matter, because when I was talking to Dame and CJ once the plans started coming out for the bubble, they were both like, I played at Weber State and Lehigh, so for me this is going to be like a throwback to my college days, because there weren't people, they didn't have the fans that Melo had at Syracuse or Gary Trent had at Duke, or these guys who went to these big time basketball schools. Dame and CJ are these mid-major dudes who have a chip on their shoulder and have proved many people wrong before. So I think they have learned potentially much earlier than a lot of NBA stars how to be internally motivated as opposed to letting the circumstances help them get motivated.
So is Staples Center that big of a deal in terms of home court advantage? Because I've always thought of it like, the celebrities are there, Jack's there in the front row, Beyonce's there in the front row, but I just thought that the craziness of the fans in Portland and just the intimacy of the stadium would lend itself to become a much more hostile advantage for the away team in that situation compared to Staples, which I think, in my opinion, and I'm asking you because I've never been to a playoff game there, it kind of seems like it's all about the glitz and the glamour, and maybe the fans aren't as loud or as passionate as, not to say Lakers fans aren't loud or passionate, but maybe the real fans get bought out by the rich people in LA compared to the sort of family aspect of Portland. That's the question I was kind of trying to ask you, because I have never been to games in either of the arenas.
That's a good question. And I think I've never been to a playoff game at Staples, so I don't know that I can give a for sure answer to that. But I think sort of that glitz and glam that you were talking about, I feel like maybe a sort of similar comparison was Oracle last year with the Warriors, because those ticket prices were crazy expensive, but Dame was the first one to be the quote unquote real Oakland fans can't afford that, right? And so you don't have the diehards there necessarily as much. And it did feel like, Moda is a very special. When Damian Lillard hit that shot over Paul George last year, my ears were ringing for several days afterwards. It was so loud. And same when they won that quadruple overtime or whatever it was against the Nuggets. So yes, I think Moda is super, super special, but I think maybe not for guys like Dame and CJ, and certainly not Melo, but you think about potentially Gary Trent Jr. or Anthony Simons, potentially with Staples Center, that glitz and that glam and that Hollywood sheen, if you will, I guess, had the potential to be intimidating, I suppose, is a better word. I think playing in Staples Center in and of itself is intimidating, whether it's actually because it's louder or if it's just because it's Staples Center and you do have Beyonce sitting front row.
You're actually reading my mind, because I was going to ask you, like, based on the home court stuff, like, we've seen so many players in the bubble just kind of, like, even if they were established, like, we've seen Michael Jordan, TJ Warren, we've seen, like, so many players across the league just put up career numbers in the bubble. And one of those guys, like, Gary Trent was playing well throughout the season, like, you know, establishing himself as part of the rotation. But what he did in those 8 games and the play-in game was remarkable. Like, I knew Gary Trent, but I didn't know Gary Trent before that. So did you see that coming, or did you expect kind of like with the neutral site, these players to, you know, just really lock in and, you know, like Gary Trent became one of the leading 3-point shooters in the bubble. That was remarkable. So I didn't see it coming. I'm going to be honest.
Well, and I think I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm not trying to say that I like saw it coming, that the bubble was going to be like Gary Trent Jr.'s space of dominance. But I think to some extent, Gary Trent Jr. is one of the most quietly determined players that I have covered. Like, he doesn't talk about what he does. In fact, he protects what he does to the point where he's like, I mean, I talked to him, I think in like April, maybe May. And I was like, oh, so what have you been doing to, you know, keep up with the game? And he was like, I can't tell you. And I was like, you don't have to give away any secrets. I just meant, like, are you working out? Do you have access to a hoop? And he's like, I have tools that are helping me get better. And I was like, okay, sounds good. You know, so that is like Gary Trent Jr. And he has wanted to be an NBA star like his dad since he was 5 years old. He told me at 5 years old, he and his dad had a conversation, and his dad asked him, do you want to be ordinary or extraordinary? And at that moment, everything in his life became about being extraordinary on the basketball court. He calls Kevin Garnett Uncle Kev. So when you have players like an NBA dad and Kevin Garnett pouring into you at an early age, and then you also decide that you want it for yourself, Gary Trent coming onto the scene was only a matter of time, whether it was in the bubble, whether it was next season. And we sort of got a glimpse of it in, I think that was January or February. I think it was February, right before the league shut down. He had a massive game against the Thunder. And we kind of jokingly, although now it probably is not very funny to call it this, but at the time it was kind of jokingly called the flu game, because he was really sick. He was getting IVs, he was getting hydration. I mean, it was like, you know, he was not feeling well, and he goes out there and has one of the best games, the best game of his career to that point. And so I think it was only a matter of time that Gary Trent found his space in the league, and it just happened to be in the bubble.
Yeah, it's awesome that they found that 3-and-D wing, because I know Harkless left, Aminu's not there, so it's kind of nice to have that other guy who can just fill that role perfectly. And I think he's, no disrespect to Aminu and Harkless, I think Gary Trent Jr. has so much more upside than those two, at least for the next like 5 to 6 years. So
he's only 2 years in, so it feels like you don't know you don't know where his ceiling is yet, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and I think he makes the game easier for Dame and CJ and some of the guys around him. But,
oh yeah, because he drains threes like nobody's business, and so you can't leave Gary Trent on the perimeter unguarded any more than you can leave Melo unguarded in a corner three. I mean, Melo's been making that shot since 2003, and yet people are leaving him open.
I have no doubt when it's like 3 minutes left that if Melo's taking that like right corner three, it's going in.
Like there's just no doubt anymore.
So we have one last question for you. Sorry we took up so much time, but
you're great. This is awesome.
Thanks. Yeah,
we discussed in
an earlier episode, like we were discussing what are some of the hardest sports not only to practice and compete in, but like achieve consistent levels of success in. And gymnastics was in our top 3, and I think we had boxing and water polo. Those 3 in some order. But as someone who did gymnastics for nearly 16 years. Could you like walk us through a typical day of training and what you think are some of the more underappreciated like aspects of the sport?
Yeah, you're really throwing it back to my glory days here. Yeah, so I started gymnastics, like my mom put me in those like mommy and me classes when I was like 2 or 3. So I started doing that, and then just really fell in love with it, fell in love with the idea of being able to flip all over the place, fell in love with just like moving, I guess. And I was like 9 or 10, and gymnastics is such an interesting sport because the shelf life is so small, right? Like at 16, you are old. you are
Mhm.
you are past your prime for the most part, which is just really crazy to think about. Um, when you just think about being 16 as like a normal, teenager. But when I was like 9 or 10, I was when I really decided that I wanted to try and be competitive. And again, I have this, I also have a childhood note somewhere, I'm sure my mom has it, that said, my life plan was I was going to go to the Olympics for gymnastics. And then I believe I was going to play in the NFL. And then I think I was going to round it out by being in Major League Baseball. And then I don't remember, there was something else after that. But so that was my dream. But at like 9 or 10, I was past the point where I could really be legitimately dreaming about the Olympics. That being said, though, I went competitive anyway and really enjoyed it. But it was like, I mean, it was my childhood. My husband always teases me about the movies that I haven't seen and the music that I haven't listened to from that era, because I was at the gym all the time. It was at least Monday through Friday. Most of the time it was Monday through Saturday. During competition season, it was like you were at a comp at a meet for 8 hours on a Saturday, and you competed for like 3 minutes. So it really was, it was my life. I would go to school. My grandpa would pick me up from school. I would go straight to practice. Oftentimes I was leaving school early. I think I did PE my freshman year because I kind of wanted to in high school, but I always had those like PE exemptions for club sport athletes, that they gave you in high school. And I was there until 9 o'clock most nights. I think we practiced from 3:30 to 8:30, something like that. You had like a 10-minute break for dinner. And that was my life from 10 to 16 was when I finally was like, I want to see what this whole high school thing is about. And I'm not going to make the Olympics. By that point I'd hurt my back several times. And so competing in college wasn't really something I was interested in doing. But it was my life for much of middle school and high school. And I loved it. I wouldn't take it back. I don't think, but it definitely touched many areas of my life, that a lot of the lessons that I've learned today come from that time of gymnastics, and come from the lessons that I learned about teamwork, about self-discipline, about motivation, about, even my job is I present, right? Like I present information, I report information, and regardless of what's going on in my personal life, no one who watches on TV will know that. And I think that skill was honed from being a gymnast, because no matter what was going on, as soon as your music started on floor, you got to smile, you got to put on the show. So yeah, I learned a lot from gymnastics, and I loved it, but definitely feel it in my knees and my back these days.
What's crazy is that all those goals you set, like the Olympics, like playing for Major League Baseball, like and then the NFL, like you ended up covering all of those things. So props to you.
Pretty much getting there in some way. That's remarkable. You have such a
I know.
crazy background, so
We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. It was awesome.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. You guys have great questions, and very personal. It felt like, yeah, you guys did a great job. Anytime.
Thank you again to AJ for joining us. It was great hearing about her work with the Seahawks, the Blazers, both the Oregon college football teams. she has such a diverse background covering so many different sports, and it was great to kind of get some more insight into that. But stay tuned for more episodes and more NBA bubble coverage, some MLB coverage. We're going to be dropping an NFL season preview soon for both the AFC and NFC. So we're going to have that on the horizon. And yeah, Ani, anything to add?
Check out our social media. We're on Instagram, podcast.lockedin. And we have a website, lockedinpod.com. So check those out for latest updates, just to stay in touch with us and stay in tune with what we're doing. But once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Locked In Podcast. And as always, stay safe and wash your hands.
Wash your hands, people. And wear those masks when you go outside. If you live in Fremont or anywhere where there's wildfires, please stay safe. Yep. Peace, guys.